This is part 3 of how the indigenous nations of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy laid the blueprint for one of the most agriculturally rich landscapes in the Northeast, and how that foundation gave rise to one of the most premier wine regions in the country, the Finger Lakes. So in the last video, I talked about how the Haudenosaunee Confederacy set up a very well-organized and sophisticated system of governance between 5 nations, including the Oneida, Onondaga, Seneca, Cayuga, and Mohawk between the 15th and 17th century, with the Tuscarora being added as a 6th nation in the 1700s. And we also talked about how the Seneca and Cayuga nations settled along the 2 largest lakes of the Finger Lakes region. So their biggest agricultural innovation was the companion planting system known as the Three Sisters, which consisted of corn, beans, and squash. And it's called the Three Sisters because these crops were completely interdependent. So the corn provided tall stalks for the beans to climb up, and you can kind of think of it as a scaffolding system. Whereas the beans provided more nitrogen in the soil, which is really good for plant growth and development. And then the squash would spread horizontally and grow along the ground, suppressing weeds and retaining moisture in the soil. So together, these plants formed a system that worked completely in harmony with the natural environment, and it required nothing beyond what the land itself could provide. But what made the Three Sister plants so remarkable was not how they grew together, but what they actually provided. The corn and squash provided the adequate amount of carbohydrates and calories and the beans supplied the proteins that most organisms and humans need to survive. So together they formed a nutritionally complete food system that kept their entire communities alive and healthy. And in addition to the Three Sisters, the Haudenosaunee also established these orchards of peaches and apples along the shorelines of the lake, taking full advantage of the warming effects that the lake has on the surrounding area. This was centuries of intentional and sophisticated land stewardship that transformed the Finger Lakes into one of the most fertile and productive landscapes in the Northeast. But by the 1600s, they were no longer alone, because that's when the French, British, and Dutch arrived to the Northeast. And they were about to come face to face with indigenous nations who had already established systems of governance, agriculture, and land stewardship.